Thanks, everybody, for joining us this evening. My name is Zach Ford. I am the chair of the Dusty Baker-Sacramento SABR chapter, and we're glad to have a great author with us tonight. Steve will make sure to introduce him later. I did want to go over just some housekeeping. Please make sure to mute yourself. We will definitely have time for question and answers afterwards. I did have a few announcements. For those of you that have not RSVP'd to our chapter dinner on Sunday, there are a couple more spots available. So just shoot me an email or a message and I will make sure to add you. I do definitely need to have prepayment though, to meet our minimum and everything. So that is still a possibility. A few more announcements. Our last meeting with Shane Barclay from Japan Ball. We mentioned that we were going to be meeting with him and joining him at one of his tour stops in Martinez. The Martinez Sturgeon of the Pecos League are going to have a game on the night of Saturday, June 25th. There's going to be a tailgate barbecue before that, and then the game. It's actually going to be at Joe DiMaggio Field. So that's going to be kind of like a cool, unique piece of history as well. Thursday, we have our next joint chapters meeting through Zoom with Judith Hiltner and Jim Walker to discuss their new book on Red Barber. And then last, I had the opportunity to speak with Dusty just very briefly before the A's-Astros game last Wednesday. About the possibility of an event possibly at his winery or something like that, something that was convenient for him over the winter. And he said that would be something that should work out. So that would be a great thing to have an event with Dusty for the first time in a few years. Since actually, I think the last time we had a meeting with Dusty was when we actually changed our chapter name to the Dusty Baker Sacramento SABR chapter. So this would be a very cool event. I'll definitely make sure to keep everybody in the loop, but that would be, again, sometime probably over the winter. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Marlene and Steve, my counterparts over in the Lefty O'Doul Bay Area chapter. They're going to introduce our guest for the evening, Craig.
Marlene, do you have anything to offer?
I'm just going to say welcome. It's good to see you guys. And I just posted, if you want to go to that game in Martinez, go to the Japan Ball Tours website and look for the West Coast Tours, and you can get a single game ticket. Nice to see everybody. Thanks for joining us. And Craig, thanks for being with us too.
Well, thank you, Marlene. Then this is my great pleasure to introduce Craig Calcaterra to everyone here. I don't think Craig and I have actually ever met face to face.
Yes, we have. We have. The 2008 SABR convention in Cleveland, Ohio. Oh. The only SABR convention I've been to, actually, but it's near me, and we met there.
That will see. Awesome. I was just going to say we've never met, but we have. But I feel as though I know him anyway. We certainly share many friends in common, and Craig and I were co-contributors for many years to the Hardball Times annual book. Craig's article was always the funny article that he contributed.
But it didn't require any work. Mine was just making jokes. Yours was all research and real writing and things.
He will share this with us. His story is fascinating. Greg is an actual full-time baseball writer. That's his full thing. He doesn't have a day job anymore. This is what he does for a living. But he hasn't always been that. He used to be a lawyer. And how you go from being a corporate lawyer to a full-time baseball writer it's not a typical career path, but Craig has strolled through it. So he's a baseball, devotee. He's really serious about baseball. If you haven't read his writing, you should. He wrote for many years for NBC Sports for Hardball Talk, and now he has a daily column blog that he provides to subscribers, a subscriber-based column called Cup of Coffee, which gives you the daily briefing on all that's going on in baseball, plus Craig's inimitable wisecracks and funny asides and just great, wonderful human touch on things. So he's a terrific writer. So he'll talk about any of that, but he specifically has just recently published this book here, which is a unique book. You won't find any other book quite like this. It talks about what it means to be a fan, a real fan of a team or of a sport, and really be into it, and sort of what that really actually means in terms of the business transaction, and how what are the downsides? It's not all good to be a fan. So he's written just an excellent. It's a quick little read, couple hundred pages. I highly recommend it. So Craig, you don't have to pitch your book because I'm pitching for you. So, but anyway, he can talk about that. He can. And look, Perry's already got it too. So please take it away, Craig, and the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you very much. A couple of notes first. I think it was Zach that said I was a real writer. No, Steve's a real writer. Steve wrote a book that actually required a lot of research and work and everything. I wrote a manifesto. Those are way easier. Manifestos, you don't got to check your work. You just got to vent from the spleen. So that's part of what I did. The other thing is Dusty Baker has the night off tonight. He got suspended for a game because of the little incident with the Mariners yesterday. He should be here. I feel slighted, but we'll let that go considering this is his namesake chapter and everything, but it's okay. He's probably watching on TV at least, or maybe he's, muted on here watching us. That'd be really nice. But thank you for having me. As Steve mentioned, we've known each other in that way that people on the internet know each other for probably over 20 years now, back when Baseball Think Factory was still Baseball Primer, and all of us are now a lot older, and I'm still bald, so that's the same thing. As far as you mentioned where I came from, I was a lawyer for 11 years, and but I've been a baseball fan for 48 and a half years. Well, not quite that long, but most of my life. And when the lawyer stuff started getting very dreary and I started to get a little burnt out, I turned to my love and I anonymously started blogging about baseball in 2006, 2007, because it was fun and being a lawyer was not fun. And it just so happened to get popular in a certain way. My blog got some readers, some people who could tell other people about it. And after a couple of years, NBC Sports asked me if I wanted to quit being a lawyer and write for them. I lied and I said, well, I have to think about it. But then I made the decision to forego a huge percentage of what my salary was at the time to write about baseball for a living. And about 13 years later, I'm almost making what I was making as a lawyer back then. So I'm not going to say it's paid off, but it's definitely made me happy. And everybody here knows it's much more fun to talk about baseball than it is to talk about anything else. Even if my kids don't think so, but that's okay. They don't know what they're missing. As far as the book goes, the title of it is Rethinking Fandom. A lot of people, when I talked about what the book was going to be about, but before it came out, I think got the impression that I was going to be rejecting fandom or why it's stupid to be a fan or something along those lines. That's not what I'm doing here. I'm critical of sports, of teams, of leagues. I'm a critical fan. I don't subscribe to the rah-rah, whatever the team is doing is what I believe sort of school of fandom. I'm guessing most SABR members are more like me than not in terms of you're critical, you're aware, you're much more aware of history, obviously. So you're not going to be fed whatever sports radio is feeding you and things like that without at least being skeptical. So in some ways, I have an easier audience tonight than I have at other events that I've done. But I am critical, and it started to come to me over the last few years. There was never an aha moment. Oh, I need to write this book and I need to talk about this. But I've talked about enough of the issues in this book about the perils of being a fandom and the pitfalls of fandom to where I felt like maybe I should put it all in one place. And I guess if I had to describe what I'm up to here is, and I'm sort of stealing this because there was someone else, two women who wrote another book a couple of years ago called How to Be a Fan How to Love Sports When Sports Don't Love You Back was basically the book. It was a wonderful book. And that's kind of what, was in the back of my mind as I wrote this was sports don't love you back. And I wanted to dive into the way that sports don't always support us the way we support them. In fact, I think less often than not, they support us the way we support them. And what that means for us. Does that mean we need to stop being a fan? Does that mean we need to change the way we approach sports? Sometimes yes, not always. Ultimately, though, what I think that the overarching idea of this book is, if rooting for a team or following a sport is no longer fun for you, don't do it or don't do it in the way you've always done it. And there are a number of ways it doesn't become fun. And a lot of that is because of this term that I ripped off from Dwight Eisenhower. I refer to it as the sports industrial complex. It's a little dramatic for sports. I get that. But the idea is similar to Eisenhower's military industrial complex in the sense that what he was on about was that there is this machinery out there that sort of, it's the tail wagging the dog. You're supposed to have a military in order to defend yourself when you need it. You're supposed to have sports because it's an entertainment that you love and you enjoy. But they've become so big. They've become so powerful in certain ways. They've become so influential, and they sort of create their own gravity, as it were, that they dictate the show more than the people who should be in charge of it dictate the show. I personally think fans should be in charge of sports, or maybe not in charge of it, but we should certainly be the point and the object. They're putting on an entertainment for us, and they're asking for our money, for our love and our loyalty. And maybe they should be serving that, but increasingly they don't. And in the first half of the book, I talk about the ways in which the sports industrial complex, and when I say that, I'm referring to the teams, the owners, Commissioner Manfred, Commissioner Selig before him, all of the commissioners, the sports leagues, the executives who run ESPN, Comcast Bay Area, who used to be kind of my employer, all of those institutions that have a vested interest in sports say more about where sports go these days than the fans do. And in the first half of the book, I talk about how that works. I have a chapter there called Rooting for Laundry. You're all familiar with that term, I'm sure, whether you've heard it through Seinfeld or just popular usage, in terms of how we tend to root for the Giants and we tend to root for the Athletics, but the players change all the time. We're in certain ways rooting for the laundry. Now, I'm a little bit more nuanced about it. I think we're rooting for history. We're rooting for our shared memories. We're rooting for players that span a long period of time and things like that. It's a little deeper than that. But the way that the teams view it, I think increasingly, is that we're just rooting for the logos, and that no matter who they put in the shirt, we'll root for them. The A's are definitely putting that to the test right now. Marlene's nodding; she knows. It's a situation where there is a truth to that, and we can't escape that. I've been a baseball fan for decades. Over the course of that time, the teams that I've rooted for have turned over multiple times. We all know how that works. So yes, in some ways, we are loyal to a brand. We are loyal to a franchise. But I think what the sports industrial complex has done, what the owners of the teams have done, has just assumed that no matter what they do, we will always be there. That's an important observation, I think. It's something that we have to be aware of, that that's how they view us in certain ways. And we got to keep that in mind as they do things like slash their payroll, as they do things like threaten to move to Las Vegas, as they do things that, like acquire a player that we find abhorrent. And I guess that's a Dodgers thing, not really, but it's one of those deals where we need to be mindful of where our loyalty comes from and who we give it to and why. They think we're always going to give it to them. Maybe that doesn't have to be the case. I move on in the book to talk about other ways in which the sports industrial complex takes advantage of us. One way, in baseball particularly, it's a newer phenomenon, and we've probably all been aware of it. Things like tanking, rebuilds that never seem to go anywhere, rebuilds that seem aimed purely for financial reasons. Winning is increasingly not the point of the sport for a lot of sports owners and sports executives these days. I'm not going to be so naive to say that sports have never been about business, but they're increasingly more about business now than they ever have been. There are owners, whether they are in Oakland, whether they're in Pittsburgh, whether they're in Cincinnati, that aren't all that interested in winning, because the way the financial system is set up is you can make a profit before you ever play a game. That's something that is antithetical to the experience of a fan. We expect, in exchange for our loyalty and our money and our time, we expect at least a good faith effort to win. We don't expect a championship every year, but we expect competition. Increasingly, that's not happening. We're seeing this, and the book doesn't deal just with baseball, it deals with other sports, because I think the idea of tanking came mostly through basketball, is where that term came from. We've seen it in football when you're trying to get a good quarterback. Baseball is a little bit of a different beast because you can't in one draft turn things around. But in certain ways, it makes it more pernicious in baseball, because if you're, say, the Astros or the Cubs or some teams that tried to do this several years ago, you might just punt, 5 years in an effort to try to win down the road. And what does that do for you as a fan? How obligated are you to stick with that? I think most of us are pretty devoted, and we will stick through it, especially if you're interested in the mechanics of team building and stuff. There is something to be gained from that. But what of the casual fan who takes a kid out to the game and they want to see a recognizable player? They want to see at least a good shot at winning. I think the example I used to use was the Tampa Bay Rays. They've had quite a run of success over the last 10, 12, 14 years, I guess now. But in some ways, the team is always a little bit anonymous. Wander Franco is a huge star right now. How long is he going to be there? Evan Longoria was a huge star there. If you have a 7-year-old kid and you buy him a little Longoria t-shirt, you go to the game and, well, I'm sorry, he's playing for the Giants now. It's kind of hard. It's hard to build generational fandom. And that's something that I think is difficult. We have to contend with it. Another thing that goes on is the financial, and this is another chapter in the book, the way in which the game has become, at least in the in-person sense, a game for the wealthy. We all can go to a game once in a while. I think all of us in this chat probably have gone to a game in the last year or two, or pre-COVID more often. But the idea of the kind of baseball attendance that maybe a lot of us who are older had when we were younger, where you might go to a dozen games a year. Maybe your dad has a half season ticket package or something like that. It's increasingly hard for people who aren't, at least of some means. The game has gotten much more expensive. The stadiums have gotten smaller. Luxury has ruled the day. Every stadium that is built now is geared towards very wealthy folks. You in the Bay Area probably are party to the most extreme example of this, I think, that has ever existed, which is where the Warriors play now. I talk in the book about the shift across the Bay for the Warriors, and that priced out even rich people. Only the stinking rich people really can be a season ticket warrior for the Warriors now, but it priced out even the normally rich people. That's an extreme example, but it's happening everywhere. It's happening in Cleveland and Cincinnati and places that I'm familiar with, where the luxury customer is who the sport is catering to. Boxes, exclusive clubs, things like that. And what does that mean for us? Are we welcome really if we're part of the hoi polloi? I guess I'm part of the hoi polloi. I like to think I am anyway, but I increasingly don't feel like the game experience is for me in person. I'm only a tourist there. I'm going to a Tigers game on Saturday up in Detroit. And I splurged for some good tickets. Not that tickets are hard to find for Tigers games right now, but I wanted to have somewhere nice. I wanted to be in the shade. I wanted to do all these things. It's expensive as hell. It's crazy. And this is the Detroit Tigers we're talking about right now. So that's something to be mindful of, and something that bothers me a little bit. There's the political stuff. We're all familiar with this as well too, how teams have leveraged our loyalty and our love of our team against us to extract tax dollars for a new stadium. I think folks around Oakland are familiar with how this is working right now. We're all, I don't mean to be dramatic, but we're sort of held hostage here. The reason they're able to get away with it is because there aren't enough people that are just stopping and saying, oh, you don't want to play here? See ya. I'll get to a minute for how that's hard. I do understand that's hard. I'll talk about that in a minute, but that's another thing that is happening, where our loyalty is what is being leveraged and our love is being leveraged. That's how they can go to the political leaders and say, you need to give us $1 billion for this stadium. They couldn't do it if they weren't a brand that has built 100 years of loyalty or 50 years of loyalty in a city. And so that's the first half of the book is generally that. There's also some stuff about labor. I'm sure you guys are really familiar with that, but I wrote that part of it about for people who aren't quite familiar with how labor works. Maybe you have some anti-union predispositions or something like that, and or maybe you think that in sports, guys who make $1 million, that's not the same labor story as it is for somebody who's in the United Mine Workers, and it isn't. It's a different thing. But I try to at least make a good faith effort to say, look, if you have to be on one side, maybe you should be on the labor side, not the management side. So that first half is all about laying out the landscape of what professional sports are right now, and college sports to some degree too, about how it is a business for them in ways more so than we even think when we're being cynical about sports being a big business, and about how we're the product in a lot of ways too. And that's something that we have to be aware of when we sit down to watch a game. I mean, we don't have to, but it's something that's nice to be aware of. The second half is then really okay, what do we do about that part of the book? And again, this is where I get to, it's not about rejecting fandom. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't root for your team. It doesn't mean that you're wrong for having a loyalty that is irrational for your team. I tend to come at these topics from a left brain perspective. I'm an analytical type person, but I do fully understand that sports is about love and passion and irrationality in all the best ways. That's the good moments we've all had with sports come from our heart, not from our brain. And I get that. But at some point, even if you're in a relationship that's all about the heart, you can't be taken advantage of so much. And how do you deal with that? If you get to the point where you're just not able to reconcile what you give to the team versus what they give to you, what can you do without just saying, I'm not going to be a baseball fan anymore, or I'm not going to be a football fan anymore? The first chapter I have in this is the one that has gotten me the most hell from everybody, talking like talk radio hosts and people that have had me at book events and things. It's called Be a Fair Weather Fan. That is a dirty word for a lot of people about being a fair weather fan. And I get that. We all have a history with that of, oh, you're only around when they're winning. But winning's fun and losing sucks, right? It does. And I'm not saying that if the team is, 79 and I can't do the math right now, 83 or something, that you can't root for them, but you will root for them when they win 90 games. But there does come a point when it's okay to walk away from your team for a while because it's just not fun anymore, or they're not trying, or they don't care anywhere near as much as you care. And I don't mean the players here, I mean the management and the ownership. If you're a fan of the Pittsburgh Pirates, and for years, the owner, Bob Nutting, has just put nothing into the team, has sent off the very good players that they've had there in the last 10 or 15 years, doesn't ever make appearances, doesn't seem to care. At what point do you have to stop and say, I can't support this anymore, but I love baseball. I'm going to watch the Indians for a while or the Guardians for a while. It's not common. I know it's controversial, but you can really do that. If you're a fan of the Boston Red Sox and you love Mookie Betts when he was with the Boston Red Sox, and then the team let him walk away, do you have to hate Mookie Betts all of a sudden? I don't think you do. You can still root for your Red Sox, but you know what? You can watch a Dodgers game and root for Mookie Betts. It's weird. And maybe there are certain lines you can't cross. If a player goes from the Giants to the Dodgers, I don't really think you're going to become a Dodgers fan. That's a bit much. I don't expect that. But there could be some fluidity to that I think people have just reflexively thought that they can't do. Part of it is because sports fandom was always a local thing. Part of it is because maybe you got your sports fandom from your parents. So that's a very common thing. But we live in an age now with streaming and with cable packages and things like that. You can watch almost anybody if you really want to. You're not stuck with the Pirates if you're from, Washington, Pennsylvania. You might think you are, but you're not. In some ways, it's the way cable is all set up. It might be easier to watch a team not in your market anymore than it is to watch a team in your market. I've had that experience. I was a Tigers fan when I was a kid because I was born in Flint, Michigan, and I lived there till I was 11. We moved away in 1985, so I got in just under the wire. I got to see the World Series that year, but I moved away, and I could not see the Tigers anymore. I was in West Virginia at that point, and all I got was WTBS, the superstation. I didn't make some proclamation one day that I was no longer going to root for the Detroit Tigers, but the Atlanta Braves were on my TV every single day, like 144 times a year, which in the mid 80s was a lot for a team. You didn't get that many broadcasts. And so over time, it just sort of shifted. And I was a Braves fan forever and ever. And I think if you search my name online, people will say, oh yeah, that guy's a Braves fan, because I have been for a very long time. But a few years ago, something weird happened. The Braves got different ownership. They did that whole deal where they moved their stadium out of Atlanta. I'm not from Atlanta. I have no loyalty to it, but I didn't like the way that just sort of ran. They sort of abandoned the city to go to the suburbs to chase some dollars, and a lot of people were left alienated by that. I increasingly had issues with their Native American iconography, which caused me a lot of problems. And then, frankly, just with the exception, I think Freddie Freeman might have been the last young player, maybe Acuna a little bit, but that I, was very invested in from the time they were drafted or signed as an international free agent. I watched them come up the ranks, and I just woke up one day and I felt a little alienated from my team for a number of reasons. At the same time, my children, for a lot of random reasons that I explained in the book, started gravitating towards the Dodgers. I'm sorry for all you Giants fans on this, but it's true. They just started gravitating towards the Dodgers. I think it was because, there were some, big personalities there. My daughter was a little kid at the time, and she wanted to know who was the best pitcher in baseball. And I said, well, Clayton Kershaw, probably. Okay, I like the best pitcher. Clayton Kershaw's my favorite pitcher. Okay, fine. My son, who is kind of obnoxious, was like, who's the most obnoxious player in baseball? I said, it's probably Yasiel Puig. So, of course, he was like, they're into that. And they got interested in the Dodgers for no reason whatsoever. And I would turn on Dodgers games because they thought it was cool. The Dodgers came to Cincinnati. And I got to take my kids down there because they wanted to see them. So I'm like, why not? We went to a Dodgers game. We even bought shirts. I took my kids on a vacation to California. Now, I did take them to the Bay Area too, but they kind of like Los Angeles. I'm sorry. And they went to a game. I took them to AT&T Park before I ever took them to Dodger Stadium. I will say that much. They liked them both. They thought LA was really cool and glitzy because they were impressionable, dumb young kids. What are you going to do? So for a few years there, why wouldn't I sort of watch the Dodgers? I don't have any connection to them, and God knows their history. How can you? But my kids liked it, and it was something I could do with my kids, and it was fun, and there was something about that. And so, I bought a Dodgers cap, and I wear a Dodgers cap a lot because I like blue, and it's a very light, shallow thing. If you ask me if I'm a Dodgers fan, I probably won't say yes. But I will certainly say that over the last decade or so, I've had a lot of very memorable and emotional experiences that the Dodgers happen to be a part of because my kids. I think that's a stronger bond of fandom than anything I ever had with the Braves. And I think it's okay to switch. Now, not everybody's story has to be that crazy. You can just say, I'm sick of these guys and root for somebody else, but you can do it if you want to. It's the game we love. That's the game that we were drawn to for the most part. I don't know that it was the colors or the jerseys. And I talked about this a little bit before. Another chapter I have here is root for players. I mean, it's kind of like with the Mookie Betts thing I mentioned a few minutes ago. You can decide that an athlete is just somebody that you want to root for more than the team. You don't have to use the team as the vehicle to root for them. I find this easier for me in sports that I'm not as devoted to. I'm one of those guys that when the basketball season starts, I'll watch a bunch of basketball and then I'll sort of like lose it. But the thing with basketball is I'm interested in seeing players. I want to see these guys who are superstars play because an individual player can dominate basketball so well in any given game. So I will tend to root for a player, even if he switches teams. I want to see them play. That's something you can do in baseball. If I'm a devoted, I don't know why I would be, but everybody who lives around me is either a devoted Guardians or a devoted Reds fan. There are a couple of pretty dreary teams to watch these days in a lot of ways, the Reds more so than the Guardians, but they're not always a great watch. But you know what? If there's a game with Shohei Ohtani pitching and hitting, why wouldn't you want to watch that if you can? So root for a player. Have your viewing choices dictated by that. If you can, you still get the enjoyment out of the game. I think being a casual fan is an important part too. I have a chapter in the book about being a casual fan. Sports fandom can be a little toxic, and I'm not just talking about the arguments you get into on the internet about it. It can be sort of toxic for yourself. You tend to do things that aren't good for you. The example that I use in the book, it's a case study of myself. I'm in Columbus, Ohio. I went to Ohio State University. It's a big football school. If you're not from a big college football area, you probably can't fully appreciate how insane it is to be in that world. But I can tell you, multiply any professional sports experience you've had by about 10. That's what it's like to live in a place like Columbus, Ohio with the Buckeyes, or State College with the Nittany Lions, or Tuscaloosa with the Crimson Tide or whatever. It's that kind of a place. Even though Columbus is a big city, it's that kind of a place. I, for a good 20 some years, was very, very wound up in being an Ohio State football fan. And we're talking to the extreme levels. I could tell you which high school kids in multiple states that they were recruiting. I could tell you, I had video of these guys I was watching. I was that kind of jackass who was on every forum talking about whether this 17-year-old wide receiver is better than that 17-year-old cornerback and who should we be recruiting. It was bad. I thought I loved it. I thought I enjoyed it, but then I found myself being miserable because it wasn't enough for the Buckeyes just to win a game. It was, they didn't win by 40 over Akron. They're supposed to beat Akron by 40, but they didn't do that. So now I'm miserable. Okay. They didn't beat a 17th ranked Iowa team that they really should have beat. Now I'm really, really miserable. They lost a bowl game that, they had no business winning anyway, but they still lost it. And I was miserable for 5 months. It was terrible. And I made a decision one day that I was going to take a step back. I still was going to watch Ohio State football, but I needed to not be as immersed. I was going to just watch the games. I was going to come in, watch the games, maybe read a couple articles previewing the season. And I actually did that for a couple of years. I tried that for a couple of years. It was amazing how much more enjoyable it was. It was like going back to when I was originally a fan, because I remembered what it was to like the pageantry of 105,000 people cheering and singing songs and doing things. And I remembered the beauty aesthetically of the game. And I sort of jettisoned all of the baggage and all of the things that I thought were important about it. I think we as fans, when we get very, very immersed in something, sometimes forget what really caused our love for the game, what really caused us to come to it. And I don't think everybody has to be that way. I mean, we're baseball obsessives or we wouldn't be here. But if it's causing you, distress, if it's making you unhappy, if you're grumpy for more than 10 minutes after a game's over, examine that a little bit. That's all I'm saying. Take a step back. There's nothing wrong with it. This stuff is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be entertaining. And if you just rethink the way you look at the game a little bit, you will be able to find some more enjoyment out of it if you have found that for a while you've been in a rut. And then beyond that, I just talk about sports are more than just the winning and the losing. And I don't mean that in the sort of hippy dippy way of, it's all, everybody's good here, we're all just competing. I mean, there are other things to it. Saber people will probably appreciate this a lot. I mentioned to Steve, I've been to one Saber convention, but I have friends who are totally immersed in this stuff all the time. You could go for 3 days to a Saber convention and not really have anybody talk about a game that's happened that week. It's rare. I mean, people will talk about the games, but you're talking about what happened on a Philippine air base in 1905 with a pickup baseball game. And that's really cool. Or you're talking about, the equipment that backup catchers used in, 1947. That's great stuff. It's amazing stuff. That has nothing to do with the game that's on tonight. I refer to, I came up with this word for it, and I wrote about it. I think it was for Baseball Prospectus or the Hardball Times. Somebody, I did a column about this a few years ago. But I call it meta fandom. It's you're not rah-rah rooting for the game at hand, but you are immersed in this world, and it's a bigger world than just the games and just the players and just the wins and losses this year. It could be fantasy sports. It could be history. It could be reading novels about your sport. It could be any video games, anything. There are a million ways that when sports are not loving you back, you can still love the sports that you love. And I think we need to appreciate that it's a bigger world than just what ESPN is pounding into our heads on any given night. And that's kind of, even though that's a weird narrow chapter about all kinds of strange pursuits that people do in sports, I think that's kind of the big takeaway here, though. Find your enjoyment, no matter what it's from. Look, this is going to sound crass, but I know people, I have friends, and back in the day, it used to be more friends' wives or whatever. Look, they just watch baseball because they like to see the guys in the tight pants. Okay. That's valid. It's totally valid. I don't care what your reason is. If you're getting love and enjoyment out of it, do it. And try to break away from the orthodoxy of sports fandom as it's been handed to us, or as someone like Bill Simmons says it has to be. It doesn't have to be that way. That's what this book is. It's about 220 pages, short pages, breezy read of ranting. It's a manifesto is what I tell people. I'm not dropping tons of footnotes. I'm not telling you about the history of this or that. I'm just giving you a breezy sort of idea about, hey, you know what? This doesn't have to be that hard. Let's make it easy. And that's what the book is. I guess that's all I got.
Well, that's an excellent, I think, beginning of some discussion. I would love to have you deal with any questions or comments anybody has.
Well, first I see Perry mentioned, I call baseball my bad boyfriend in the chat. That's like a perfect analogy. That is absolutely the way it is. Like if you have a spouse or you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend that is like just kind of being a jackass for a while, back away for a minute. It's okay.
I have a question myself. Feel free, folks, type it into the chat space there. Craig can see it and he can just react directly there. Or if you just want to put up your raised hand, we can unmute you and have you ask your question verbally. But I'll just lead off with one here, Craig. I hear what you're saying. My brain gets it, right? I
The heart's the
logically,
hard part.
the heart's the hard part. When I was taught to be a fan by my family, by my older brothers and by my mom and dad, who'd been Oakland Oaks fans. And so it was a, the be a fan of your local team was drummed into me. The whole notion that you're not really a fan unless you're a fan when the team is bad. It's not like that's an option.
Mm-hmm.
That's the requirement, because unless you're a fan when the team is bad, then you don't really have any investment here. You're not really being true. You're not devoting yourself. It was a moral lesson. It wasn't an economic, practical thing at all. It was all about fidelity and commitment and trust. And it was deep, deep stuff. And they pounded it into me, man.
I agree. I totally get that. I think everybody has something familiar, similar to that. We could all relate to that. My argument is that fidelity and that trust and that loyalty was something that, at least for a very long time, was at least nominally reciprocated. The teams would generally try to win. The teams generally, and part of it was a little economic, right? Because if the team didn't win, you wouldn't show up. And if you didn't show up, they go bankrupt or they have to sell the team. And one argument that I make in this book, and I write about this a lot in my newsletter, and I wrote my columns at NBC, is one of the central problems we have in sports these days is that the economic benefits of owning a sports team are increasingly divorced from winning. You can now own a sports team and lose 120 games. You lose a baseball team, lose 120 games. But because of national TV contracts, because of real estate developments around your ballpark, because of the gambling associations with your team, because of the official partner of Major League Baseball, and there are a lot of official partners of Major League Baseball now, the money now comes in regardless of whether fans show up. And if every team is profitable now before a single ticket is sold. Now they want people to show up. Obviously, it's better to have attendance than not, but it's not as important. And so that we'll try to win for you, and then you'll give us your loyalty thing has broken down in a lot of ways. Not everywhere. I think there are a lot of teams that still do it, but in a lot of places that's broken down. And that's where I think it's okay. If they're not doing for you, then we no longer have to do for them the way we always did. Personally, if I was, say, a Giants fan, I'd feel pretty confident in my fidelity to the team. I think on the whole, certainly over the last, 20 years or so, it's been an experience where I always feel like the Giants are, we all have quibbles, but I always feel like the Giants are trying. They're trying to put a good product out there. They care about their city. They care about their fans. And that's a wonderful thing. Talk to somebody in Baltimore or Pittsburgh or something like that, and it's a very different story.
Yeah.
Craig, can I follow up on that? I'm
Sure.
a Reds fan, and I'm not.
I noticed by your handle there.
But they hate us. The ownership hates us.
If you're not familiar with what he's talking about, and this is the example I talk about in Ohio all the time, on opening day, which, as you know, in Cincinnati, opening day is sacred. It is a holiday. The city shuts down. There is a parade. It is a big frickin' deal to have opening day in Cincinnati. And was it Phil? Phil Castellini, son of the owner Bob Castellini.
The Mark Davis guy.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to put it. Mark Davis with a better haircut. And he came out and he was talking to a very team-friendly outlet. It was the radio station that carries their games. And
WLW.
Yeah, WLW. And the reporters said, in a very softball way, it was set up to let Phil Castellini sell the 2022 Reds to the fans. Hey, you got rid of a lot of stars this year. You traded. There's a lot of changes with the team. It doesn't look like they're really poised to win as much as they have the last few years. What do you say to fans who are concerned about the direction? And Phil Castellini's response is, where are they going to go?
Where are you going to go?
He actually said, where are you going to go? It was basically a middle finger of, you're stuck. You're a Reds fan. We got you. You owe us no matter what we do. He didn't get it.
Two other
And-
things, Craig. I listen to you a lot on Infinite Inning.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Steve's a good friend.
It's a great podcast. And the third thing is John Fisher's the same thing with Oakland A's. I mean, if he's going to move, he's still got a crappy owner.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, if he moves, I don't think, if there are Las Vegas baseball fans, I'm not quite sure what they expect.
But your point being that they make money whether anyone shows up or not.
Right. And sure, do they make Dodgers money in Oakland? No, they don't. But they're doing fine. And if they actually had invested in the team, if they had tried to be a little less jerky about how the stadium thing has gone over the last 20 years or whatever, and granted, I think there are probably more challenges to a baseball team in Oakland than there are to most teams in baseball. So I get it. I'm not unsympathetic to the problems that they sort of face, but they're billionaire problems, right? They're not regular problems. They're very relative. Oh no, I am not, the group that owns the Giants. I am not Mark Walter in Los Angeles. But they've just been dismissive of fans and have taken Oakland fans for granted. And Oakland, I mean, look, I'm not going to tell you guys this because you know it better than me, but my experience, I have a lot of friends in the Bay Area. I've been out there a lot. I talk to people, I've read a lot. I mean, Oakland's a baseball town, or it used to be. I mean, I know the Raiders were always the biggest thing, but it's a good baseball town. It's a really good fan base. Like a lot of cities, I think Cleveland is an okay baseball town, but in a lot of ways, Cleveland, as soon as the Browns start, everybody goes away. In Oakland, there are just deep, knowledgeable baseball fans in ways that cities that have had teams for much longer than Oakland has had the A's aren't. And the way they've just been crapped on has just been heartbreaking. Oh, so a couple of years, you say the fans were treated great. Was it a better experience before?
Well, the fans were courted, and season ticket holders, they bent over backwards to take care of season ticket holders, and they had this all access pass for $99.
I remember
you
that.
could go to every game, and fans felt good. They were fixing up the stadium. They were trying out all these new things, and then COVID hit, and Las Vegas came into play, and things flipped.
Yeah, I noticed they raised ticket prices. They got rid of that pass situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the idea is like we'll try to bleed everybody we can, if we can. But I think also we can set up a narrative to where if we do end up having to bolt to Las Vegas, we could say, look, they abandoned us, and enough people will buy it without being critical that it won't matter.
What mystifies me about that, though, Craig, is why do they care? Why do they bother? As long as they get the votes from the other owners, they could move anytime they want, right? They don't have to justify it. It's the only court that they have to appeal to is the fellow owners, right?
I think that's true. I also think, though, that the owners don't want to have a situation where then everybody's wanting to do it, right? I think overall there's a sense of we can't look like all 30 of us are being mercenaries. If someone
because
is going
we
to,
are,
because we are, we don't want the truth out. I think the idea is at some point someone in Congress will hail them in to sit in front of a committee. It won't do anything, but it'll be embarrassing. At some point, a reporter in the next city that is going to have this issue is going to say, aren't you just doing what they did in Oakland? I think that they still like to have the story, the fig leaf that says, oh, our city abandoned us and we had to go. I mean, Montreal was a great example. I mean, they torpedoed Montreal. I'm not going to say Montreal was a great baseball market at the time, but it was a way better one before the Jeff Loria, Bud Selig end game of getting that team out of there came to pass. And they made sure they orchestrated it in such a way that gave them the ability to say, hey, we tried. And I think they still want to do that for whatever reason.
Sure. Wayne.
Yeah, as far as Montreal is concerned, it's hard to, there are many, many reasons why Montreal failed. And I hate to recommend a book by Jonah Carey concerning what's happened with him.
It is a good book. I'm not going to lie.
What's that?
It's a good book. I'm not going to lie, despite
it lays out in detail exactly what happened and why Montreal, a great, great baseball city, lost its club. The Jays came in for 2 games a year, last 2 games of spring training for 5 or 6 years. And we packed, but this is before I moved to San Francisco, we packed 50,000 people in that place every night. One year, there was a 0-0 game going into the bottom of the ninth. St. Louis Cardinals were in town. The Toronto Blue Jays had this 19-year-old kid who happened to have been born in Montreal because his father happened to have played in Montreal. Look it up on YouTube. It's a great clip. They've sent this 19-year-old kid, and you know exactly who I'm talking about.
Junior.
Pinch hit in the bottom of the ninth inning. And the second pitch, he launches into the bleachers in left center field. It was like the 7th game of the World Series. The place went absolutely bonkers.
I think a baseball team in Montreal would do extraordinarily well now.
Yeah, it was a horrible location. And it was torpedoed. Bronfman lost interest because he didn't want to pay players. They were sold to that horrible consortium headed by Claude Brochu, then Laurier, then Hiram Bithorn Stadium, and on and on and on.
So I think another thing, and again, that's mentioned in the book, and anybody familiar with the whole story knows this. I mean, for years, Washington, they wanted to keep Washington as a bargaining chip. And I think in some ways, they want to do that with Las Vegas right now, too. They like to have the idea of a city out there that can immediately grab a team that would relocate because they could use that to sort of play the city against another one. I talk about that in the book a lot, too, about how we're sort of held hostage here in that they play this sort of stadium game. At some point, though, they have to carry through on the threat. I think with Montreal, they were finally like, okay, Washington is ready. We're finally going to do it. And we will orchestrate it in such a way. The league being the caretaker owner of the team was a farce. Laurier was a farce. The way Laurier got the Marlins was a farce. All of that was to the detriment of Montreal baseball fans.
However,
and I think we're going to see this in Oakland too.
However, the Red Sox were then sold to not the highest bidder by the Yawkey Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
This is wonderful. They sold the Red Sox. Seelig manipulated the sale of the Red Sox to the John Henry Group, despite the fact that there was a local guy who bid more.
Oh yeah, that's the other thing.
And
The
you know who that is?
Well, who's the local guy?
Frank McCourt.
Oh God, I remember that now. Yeah. And they didn't like it because they were worried about his money because of that parking lot situation. And the broader takeaway here is, and it's not just because of the antitrust exemption. It started because of the antitrust exemption, but now, you know, Major League Baseball ownership is a club. They have legal protection. It's sort of a cartel, and you're in the club or you're out of the club. It used to be the antitrust exemption allowed them to approve or disapprove owners. Over the last 25 years, certainly Bud Selig made it his mission since the mid-90s to make sure that the only people who do get into the club are ones who we don't have to force to be compliant. You can't make an antitrust case if I owned the Padres and I want to sell it to Mark Cuban, but every other owner hates Mark Cuban. There could be a legal battle there. I think the antitrust exemption would fall if there was a legal battle there. Wait, you say I can't sell my property to this guy? Major League Baseball has gone to the point where every single owner now implicitly knows I'm never even going to offer the team to Mark Cuban because it won't be approved. We will only offer it to people who will agree. You don't break the law at that point if it's something you're doing on your own will. And so that's why the ownership club is what it is. Everybody is looking out for everybody else. And it's only the 30 of them. None of them are looking out for us.
Boston Press was up in arms when the Henry group got the team. By the way,
they dodged a bullet though.
Yeah, it worked. We're happy. Everyone's happy. There are very few colleges in the country, universities, that have neither baseball nor football. Is it a total coincidence that your daughter chose one of them?
Not at all, actually. Yep. As Wayne mentions, my daughter is going to the University of Vermont in August. She just graduated high school and she's going to the University of Vermont. I am not going to say that growing up in Columbus, Ohio, and having a father who went to Ohio State University was a small consideration of that, because we could put it this way. We can say the University of Vermont Catamount football team has been undefeated since 1974.
You've seen
that's
the
true. I have seen the t-shirt. That is true. But yeah. Oh, thank you, Adam. Thank you. Congrats to Anna. But yeah, I think getting away from big time college sports is a feature, not a bug of my daughter's college choice.
And congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
What else? Anybody else have any questions, comments?
Yeah, Craig,
Go ahead, Paul.
you're an attorney, I know.
Mhm.
And
I still remember some of it.
so is there anything about the tax laws that is encouraging all this bad behavior by the owners?
I mean, I would say inheritance tax is a huge one. I mean, these guys now have enough money to where even under the lax inheritance taxes that we have, they still have tax liability from passing things on to another. But in some ways, though, I think that might. I'm not trying to advocate for the elimination of inheritance taxes. I want to be clear about this. I'm a hardcore lefty, so I wouldn't be doing that. But when you're seeing second generation owners now, I think of the Illiches in Detroit. I think of the Angelos brothers in Baltimore, and to some degree the Steinbrenners in New York. There are enough reasons for to keep a baseball team in the family. It's very lucrative and stuff, but they also don't manage it the way their dads did. I'm not a fan of George Steinbrenner. But there was something to be said about George Steinbrenner and that he wanted to win. He was a jackass, but at the end of the day, he wanted to win mostly for the extension of his and glorification of his own ego. But, that's not completely inconsistent with what fans want. I mean, when I was a Braves fan, Ted Turner was the owner and he was insane and he wanted to win because he was crazy. And that worked for me. Okay. In the 90s, that worked for me. You've got this generation of, I mean, the term that gets thrown around on the internet a lot is fail sons. I think that's a little harsh, and I'm sure they're decent people in certain ways, but they did not work to get their team. They were born to get their team, and they are running their teams very much as if it were an auto body repair shop or a car dealership or, a financial consulting firm that they just happen to inherit. They don't get it in the same ways. I think if we change, I mean, it will never happen because the reason Major League Baseball has this very strong lobbying presence in Washington is because they do not want changes made that would be bad for the owners. But if we had some incentives change, whether it was through the tax system or anything else, that sort of said, you know what, no, we don't want you to own a baseball team like just because your dad did. We want somebody else to own it. It probably wouldn't be the worst thing for the sport.
On this, you talk a lot in the book about tanking.
Mm-hmm.
There's tanking because Cincinnati, we don't need to spend money. Where else are you going to go?
Mm-hmm.
But there's all, in the 21 World, there have been 21 World Series in this century. 3 teams have won 10 of them. The Red Sox, the Cardinals, and the Reds. It's hard to win a World Series. And if you're a small market club, trading the Hosmers of the world for prospects and draft picks is a way to win a championship. The Kansas City Royals have won their, if you win a championship every 30 years, you've won your share of championships. The Royals have done that. So
I think so, but I don't know that the Royals
develop.
I don't know if the Royals really tanked because they didn't have a good team to tank to begin with. They just sucked for a long time. That's a difference. I mean, the Royals tried to win for a lot in the 90s and in the early 2000s. They just didn't know what they were doing. And they did manage to amass a lot of talent. I don't have any if I was a Royals fan, I would have hated that they sucked so long, but they did build their team up. I think the tank idea though is everybody points to look what the Astros did and to some extent what the Cubs did. But those are the examples, right? I mean, the Dodgers didn't do that. The Giants didn't do that. The Red Sox didn't do that.
Oh, they can spend money.
Well, they can spend money, but I mean, in a lot of ways, you look at those teams. I don't think that. I mean, Steve can correct me. Another here can correct me. I mean, I don't think those Giants teams were creations of big spending in the free agent market. There was a lot of homegrown talent there.
The core was homegrown talent. The foundation was homegrown talent.
Did they trade prospects? Did they trade talent for prospects and draft choices to get to where they were? Because they won 3 championships in the space of 5 years.
Yeah, but I mean, the Giants were kind of a weird anomaly, though. They kind of sprung up very quickly. They weren't built gradually. They just kind of all came together in about a 2-3 year period.
Yeah, I mean, the core was very homegrown, but the extent to where they had, for lack of a better term, mercenaries. They weren't like big splash dudes. They were guys that had sort of I mean, I'm trying to think of some examples here, but
Marco Scudero.
yeah, exactly. Marco Scudero, that's a great example. I guess my point though is like the very conscious tank in baseball worked for the Astros. And then a lot of other teams have tried it and it hasn't worked. The Tigers tried it. The White Sox, the jury's still out on whether they are going to compete with it, but I don't know. The window might be closing a little bit.
The Athletics have done it. They haven't gone all the way, but they've stayed competitive for years.
The Athletics, I mean, I always thought of them as reloading. Until this last offseason, I don't remember the Athletics getting rid of talent for nothing except payroll relief. I mean, they always seem to.
And they're staying in place. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this year it seemed like a complete sell-off. Whereas in the past, it didn't always seem that way. Like, if you were big on prospects and you were really big into analysis and stuff, you're like, okay, that's a pretty decent trade the Athletics made, even though they're now only going to win 79 games this year, but in a couple of years they'll be back up to 90. So there's something to be said about the yo-yo, which I don't think is a problem, especially in baseball, because the way baseball works. But the sheer tank, nowhere near as big a problem in baseball as it is in basketball, but kind of disturbing.
Greg, there's a good comment in the chat from Steve Heath.
Oh yeah, okay. A lot. The question, if you don't see it, is besides advertising revenue, how much are the teams making from gambling, online apps, casinos, etc.? The optics aren't good. I'm still amazed that it's now okay to have teams in Vegas. Yes, you are a man after my heart, Steve Heath. I personally find it icky. Okay, I find the gambling icky. I get it. As a lawyer, I can't dispute it. I mean, the Supreme Court case, which legalized sports gambling across the country back in 2018 or 16 or whatever it was correctly decided. And I don't say that about much of what the Supreme Court does these days. It was a stupid, unconstitutional law to say you can only have legalized sports gambling in Nevada and New Jersey. That just was never going to hold. The full headfirst dive into gambling that Major League Baseball has taken and other sports have taken, I just have found to be disgusting in a lot of ways. In a huge way, because of, if you look at the economics of gambling, I have no problem. Look, I'll go to Vegas sometimes. I'll lay a bet. It can be fun. I once put $15 on the Chicago White Sox winning it all in a year after they lost like 100 games, because how fun would it be to watch the White Sox all year to see if they could do it? I lost my $15. I don't have a problem with that kind of a thing. But if you look at the economics of gambling, sports gambling, something like 90% of the revenues come from like 3% of the gamblers. It is a business that is aimed at exploiting addiction. And the way that the technology has developed around sports gambling now, with the micro bets on your phone, it's not about, hey, this team's going to win. It's about 15 to 20 bets a game about whether this pitch is going to be a breaking ball or a fastball, about who's going to score more runs by the fifth inning. That's where I think it gets really ugly. And that's where Major League Baseball and its clubs have just decided anything goes. And it's not yet, to your question, Steve, it's not yet to the point. I mean, they make way more money from TV. They make way more money from the real estate developments, kind of like the Giants are doing, the Cardinals have done, the Braves have done. But they are just going whole hog into this gambling world. I haven't seen the figures exactly yet because it's still a pretty immature market. But I mean, we're talking not 9 figures a year. We're talking, 8 figures a year. That clubs are making from this. It's not paying for, Vlad Guerrero's next contract. It's paying for a pretty good corner outfielder. But they are really obsessed, and they really see a lot of money of that in the future. And the networks are in with them too. You can't watch a game now without seeing anything but gambling ads and everything. The optics, like you mentioned, are just terrible.
Is there anything to prevent them from becoming the casino, running the betting within the stadium during the game?
Not a thing. Local ordinances maybe in certain cities, but we saw in Chicago, there's going to be there, if it's not already there, I think it might be there. There is actually a sports book in Wrigley Field now, but there is really nothing that will stop it. States are going after it because their view is, Ohio is a great example. They passed a law legalizing sports gambling because Michigan did and Indiana did and West Virginia did, and if that money's going to go out of state over the border, why can't we keep it here? So the states are going to run after it, even if they try to regulate it. But they're nowhere. We've seen the examples everywhere. The regulators are always going to be behind the big businesses, and the big businesses are going to be what runs it.
Taxing than regulating.
Yeah, it's like if we can get our cut, that's fine, but whatever, anything's going to go. There's going to be in my neighborhood, we have a grocery store. This time in 2023, I'm going to be able to, if I want to, go into the grocery store, and right next to where I would get a money order or a lottery ticket, I'm going to be able to fill out like a list of gambling ads right in the grocery store next to the checkout. It's going to just be aiming at a very ugly place, I think.
And
That's
may I inject a note on behalf of the umpires? Because consider the poor umpires, and I'm talking about their safety. I remember umpiring games in Central Park for a league from the Dominican Republic, and I would turn around and see guys like, exchanging money behind home plate on every pitch. I did not stick around to take off my uniform after the game. I would just like get out of Central Park to Central Park West and take my uniform, because money would hinge on my decision for every single thing that was happening there. And I didn't want to, find out how much responsibility they were going to hold me to.
I mean, we saw a gambling scandal involving a referee in the NBA within the last 15 years.
Well, that was something, I think that was tax related. It wasn't about actually.
No, it was actually making calls. He had like a brother, the Tim Donaghy scandal in the NBA. But the umpire thing was when they were like exchanging their first class tickets for coach tickets and pocketing the money. That was another fun one.
Yes, yeah, it was. But I worry about their safety. I mean, assuming there are still going to be human umpires by the time gambling's tentacles have completely overtaken baseball. But
that is a big concern. There was a guy that just got sentenced last fall, I want to say. They weren't actionable threats. They weren't threats that anyone tried to carry out, but this guy basically sent Instagram messages and Facebook messages to players, their families, their wives, their parents in some situations, saying, I'm going to murder this player because, and we're talking about
because he cost me money. Yeah.
It was like a Rays Tigers game in the middle of June that meant nothing. And this is a guy who he was a gambling addict, right? And because his life was falling apart, he was taking it out on people. And at some point, I mean, it's an ugly business.
Yeah. Thanks, Craig.
Mm-hmm.
Always enjoy reading you.
I love your is that the Peaches? Is that Rockford?
Yes, that's Shirley Berkovich, who just passed away a couple of months ago.
Aww.
And her nickname was Hustle. So the Women in Baseball Week is coming up, and my organization, the IWBC, is calling it the Year of Hustle.
Did you see the trailer for the new League of Their Own TV series dropped today?
I did. It's coming out pretty soon. Very exciting.
Looking forward to it. I always worry when a good movie is made into a TV show. I'm a little skeptical, but I'm willing to give it a chance.
Me too. I hope it's better than the reboot that was on TV 20 years ago. That was pretty terrible.
I forgot about that. Oh my God, I put that out of my mind.
Craig, another comment in the chat regarding the gambling issue?
Yeah, that's a great point. And the questions, the ball players make too much to be bought. But what if clubhouse personnel, trainers, umpires, all those other people? Yeah, the minor leaguers. And that's the thing. You're not going to see, Justin Turner of the Dodgers, throwing a game for $10,000. That doesn't make any sense. But gambling is going to exist for minor league sports too. These guys who are making nothing. And then the prop bets are an interesting thing too. It's not just the outcome. It's not about throwing. We think about throwing games because we think about the Black Sox scandal and all the big major scandals in sports. But the way that the micro betting is what they call it, where you can bet on multiple things a game, they're so innocuous. They're things like, will the first pitch be a ball or a strike? Will a hitter take 3 pitches? I mean, it's that level of granularity. Will a hitter take 3 pitches before he swings in his second at bat? Those are the sorts of things you'll be able to gamble on soon. And if, say, your brother-in-law is in deep financial trouble and he's like, hey, can you just take an extra pitch for me? Can you throw that first ball fastball instead of a breaking ball? That's what scares me. That's the kind of stuff that I think is going to be a problem. Minor leaguers, a guy that is, the 27th man up for a doubleheader, who this might be his only shot. Those are the people will be gotten to. It won't be about whole teams throwing games.
Oh dear.
I know, scary.
Well, on that cheerful ray of sunshine,
Hey.
But the game's great. We love it.
what
One-
else?
and
Anybody
I-
else have any comments? Go ahead, Wayne.
Yeah, one last thing, totally unrelated. I really enjoyed your Nancy Reagan bit this morning.
I get a little political once in a while. Yes. Yeah, they gave
Well,
Nancy Reagan a
it's not
stamp
the best
yesterday. And I if you're going to give somebody a stamp during Pride Month, it's not going to be Nancy Reagan if I'm in charge, but that's why I'm not in charge, I guess.
So you can't have nice things.
No, we can't. Everything gets washed away in the end. Okay.
I
Sorry.
have one other question for you, Craig.
Sure.
Pace the game.
Mhm.
What can we do about that? I mean, it is a problem.
Pitch clock. I mean, I know people think that's going to be weird and unnatural. I live in a AAA city. I go to I just went to a AAA game the other night. The pitch clock works, and I hate to say that ideas that Rob Manfred is championing are good ones, but that's one that is actually good.
Except for the Manfred man.
Well, the Manfred man I hate. That one's terrible. Yeah, the man on second, the automatic runner is terrible. But the pitch clock really does. I mean, I watched a game. It was the Columbus Clippers and the Toledo Mud Hens last Thursday night, and there were 26 total runs on 26 total hits and 9 home runs and 1 million pitchers, and including one time when they were going to let one reliever wear it, but he couldn't even get through it, so they had to get up another guy, and they had to delay constantly to get the guy ready to come in. Even then, the game was done in just about 3 hours. And that's a game that should have taken 4.5 in Major League Baseball. The pitch clock, as far as the pace goes, these guys are used to it because they've come up with it in the minor leagues. And there'll be a bitching and moaning and complaining on the part of major leaguers once they do it, but they'll get used to it really quick. As a fan, it's almost seamless. You don't notice it. The only time you notice it late in the game, when it's a blowout, you get a few drunk fans. They start counting down 9, 8, 7 to try to get in the pitcher's head. That's kind of fun, actually.
What happens when?
Well, they can't get rid of commercials. So.
And all of a sudden it goes ball. Does that happen?
I have been to since the pitch. Now it's a shorter pitch clock now in AAA than it was a couple years ago. But since the pitch clock has been in AAA for 4 or 5 years or however long it's been, I've been to a few dozen games. I think I've seen 2 automatic balls and maybe 3 automatic strikes called for either batters or pitchers dilly-dallying. They just get used to it. It's just part of their deal now. The rhythms of the pitchers are set towards, they know where the clock is. They're not even looking at the clock. They just know it now. And go watch a game. We remember, we're all of a certain age on this thing tonight. We remember games in the 80s and, gets it, winds up, pitches it. That's what it's like. It really does work and it's cool.
College baseball has been using a pitch clock for a long time. Umpires on the bases have to carry a stopwatch.
Oh.
And although college baseball, sometimes the games can go on because the scores tend to run up. But if umpires just enforce the, stay in the batter's box rule and the pitch clock, games.
I've argued that for years. I mean, we do have those rules in the book.
Yes.
They won't do it for whatever reason.
Enforcement is the problem.
For whatever reason, it started under Selig, but it definitely went crazy under Manfred. And I get it because no one has sympathy for umpires, but the idea has been to take judgment away from umpires. Every rule change that's happened, whether it's the famous Posey rule, whether it's any sort of other thing, has been aimed at taking judgment calls away from umpires and making them objective, even in situations where objective calls don't make sense. And so if there's a choice between let's let umpires have a little bit of power to enforce something versus let's have an objective outside thing do it, they're going to go with the objective thing anytime. So even though we have a rule about how long you need to get in the box or be ready to pitch, they'd rather put it on a digital clock on the wall than let umpires do that. And I think part of that's a power play thing between the league and umpires. Part of it's because we don't want another reason to argue with umpires. But they'll make a duplicative rule as opposed to have one enforced on the book if the one on the book is an umpire-based rule.
That's interesting because my big argument has always been that it's the umpires themselves who don't enforce it for any number of reasons.
I think they stopped doing that. They stopped enforcing it. And so now that Rob Manfred has a decision, do we say, umpires, you now are empowered to enforce it and you're ordered to enforce it? And they all remember what happened with the balk rule back in the 80s or whenever that was that year. They decided they were going to enforce the balk rule and it went
one
crazy.
extreme to another, so it seems, yeah.
Yep.
So, But I use it, and my games are 2 hours and 22 minutes. So
You have greater authority than Angel Hernandez does, and people
and
respect
man,
you.
I use it too when I'm out. I don't mess around. I don't like to stand out there for 3.5 hours. So
Angel Hernandez. Oh my God.
Stockton Ports at San Jose Giants Sunday night, 6-5 game. 10 or 12 hits for each team. A lot of base runners, a very a lot of pitching changes, all that stuff. It was the ninth inning, and I didn't realize it was already the ninth inning. I thought it was about the seventh.
Yeah.
It was 2 hours and 20 minutes, maybe. It was great. It was.
I hate to be that guy, but it's better baseball. I mean, I just think it's better baseball when it zips along a little bit. And it's not about the length of the game. It's just about, it's always something's going on.
right, exactly. It's the inner pace within the larger framework of stateliness of baseball.
That's a wonderful way to put it. You must be a writer in addition to an umpire.
She writes well.
Well, everybody, thank you for having me here tonight. I
And you have
appreciate
beautiful
it.
handwriting too.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you for your work every morning.
Great. And I hope you guys get to hang out with Dusty Baker soon.
Yes. Isn't that awesome? Isn't that awesome? Dusty Baker.
That's really cool. I think the chapter around here is named after somebody who's been dead for 70 years. So you guys are way better off. All right. Well, have a good night, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you everybody for taking part. We'll see you next time.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Carrie, see you Thursday.
All right. Thanks, Marlene. Thanks, everybody.